My first time, thank you. So the big idea behind the Stop Funding Hate campaign is the concept of ethical advertising. The idea that advertising is and should be and should become a business and human rights issue. So if a newspaper is publishing stories that demonize migrants and fuel xenophobia, then the advertisers who fund that newspaper need to be concerned and should take responsibility. And if we want to tackle xenophobia effectively, then we have to talk to advertisers and encourage them to switch their advertising away from publications that demonize migrants and towards those many outlets that behave responsibly and fairly on this issue. The Stop Funding Hate campaign is very new. We only started in August last year, but we already have tens of thousands of supporters in the UK and over 200,000 followers on Facebook. And our campaign videos have been shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media and reached millions of people. And we think that the reason we've seen this huge response is that a great many people around the world, including in the UK, are deeply concerned about the rise in xenophobia and the role of the media within that problem, and they are looking for constructive things that they can do as individuals to push back. We also think that people are seeing that this is an approach that can cut to the heart of the problem if it reaches a big enough scale. We know that if enough of us use our voice as consumers, companies will start to respond. Our first big success, as has been mentioned, was in November last year when the global toy brand Lego agreed to end its promotional partnership with the Daily Mail newspaper, which is a newspaper that is notorious for its demonisation of migrants and which has actually been called out by the UNHCR over its coverage. In recent months we've heard from a number of other companies who've told us that they have switched their advertising as a result of the campaign. But it's not only in the United Kingdom. In the United States, almost 2,000 advertisers have stopped their promotions with a notorious website called Breitbart, following a consumer campaign organised by another very new group called Sleeping Giants. And there are now Sleeping Giants chapters in many other countries around the world, including here in Switzerland. So there is a growing global movement of ordinary citizens working together to push back against the rise in xenophobia and racism by using their power as consumers. And Stop Funding Hate is a part of that movement. We think this shows that ethical advertising is an idea whose time has come, and we think that if it's applied on a large enough scale, it could really help to tackle this demonisation of migrants within the media. Because we know that part of the reason that these hateful stories are getting published is that hate is part of the business model. This drip of front pages demonising migrants is clearly very divisive, but it can also be a very effective way for a newspaper to boost its sales and therefore in turn its advertising revenue. And if we want to change this, we have to find a way to make hate unprofitable. We need to reach a critical mass of big companies who will publicly commit to advertising ethically, to make it part of their corporate social responsibility policy that they will not advertise in publications that incite hatred. We have some recommendations for consideration. Firstly, UN member states can lead by example here by publicly committing themselves to the principle of ethical advertising and ensuring that any government advertising campaigns are not channelled through media that have a track record of inciting hatred. We would also encourage UN agencies and large NGOs who have fundraising or publicity budgets to do the same with any advertising that they commission. But obviously the private sector is where most advertising happens, so we think it's critical for all stakeholders to find ways of engaging constructively with the private sector on this issue. The more voices there are who support ethical advertising, the easier it will be for businesses to come on board. So in terms of the Global Compact, we would suggest that it should include within its strategy for tackling xenophobia some guidelines for business on ethical advertising. In the briefing document for today's session, there is a list of commitments that member states could make within the Global Compact. Point number 7 looks at establishing partnerships with political leaders and parties and the private sector to promote tolerance and respect, and also conducting targeted awareness campaigns to combat prejudice. And we would see an important role for ethical advertising policies within that approach, because it's a way of tackling the problem at its source. Awareness campaigns are certainly important, but so long as it remains profitable for media to publish very xenophobic stories, it's going to be an uphill struggle. So any strategy for combating media xenophobia has to include measures for cancelling out the financial incentives that are driving this hostile media coverage. Ethical advertising could help to make hate and xenophobia unprofitable. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your intervention and suggestions for consideration. Now I would like to invite Ms. Pia Mukit, who is